Good morning, everyone, from the East Coast, the West Coast, and everywhere in between. I'm Michelle Swan, a partner at Tercera, and I will introduce Heather shortly. But I am very excited about this topic of employer branding for lots of different reasons. First and foremost, Tercera is an investment and advisory firm that specializes in people-based businesses. And being in the market of people-based businesses, employee experience is a huge topic and very critical for growth. So very excited about that. And then like everybody else in the free world, we too are hiring. So any tips, Heather, you can give us on how to stand out in today's market would be very valuable. And then just personally, I'm kind of a brand geek and Heather's the best. So very excited to have her here. So Heather is our speaker. She spent more than 20 years in marketing.
Yes. Oh, that makes me sound old. Yes.
And 11 of those was in one of the biggest employer brands out there, which is United Health Group, where you sat in a very interesting position between marketing and HR, and I think reported into them both, maybe at the same time.
Yes.
Which is unusual. And you've led talent branding globally for them. And then one of the interesting things I thought you had mentioned is that you've been involved in 20 plus acquisitions and helping to actually integrate the teams and the cultures of those acquisitions, which is super hard. So kudos on that. And you've spoken all over the world on this topic. So we're very excited to have you. One of the things I met Heather about a year ago, and one of the things I also love about her is she takes a very fuzzy topic of employer branding and makes it very concrete and gives some pretty tactical advice. So she's going to have some tips for us along the way, and I will turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm going to share my slides, but I just want to take a moment and talk to you face to face. As Michelle said, I worked for United Health Group, background in marketing and HR. What I do now is I do work with small, mid-sized, and high-growth businesses on culture and embedding culture, employee engagement and retention, employer branding, and manager development. And you'll hear how we go through today, how all of those it may sound like it's a laundry list, but all those things actually click in together. And companies that have that all clicked in together, those are the ones that have the strongest distinction and differentiation in the marketplace, but more importantly, inside their organizations. And those that maybe haven't clicked those things all together tend not to. I'm going to talk quickly because we got a lot to cover to try to take a fuzzy subject and make it, concrete. So I am going to talk fast, but we are going to be using the chat. And so I'm going to kick off with a few questions. So be ready to, post your questions in the chat. I'll be, I'm going to try to be really good and check for those questions as we go through, so you don't have to hold it till the end. Number one. And then before we kick off, the other thing I wanted to share with you is a little story that we're going to come back to, is that pre-pandemic was working with a small high growth company, and they were going to disrupt an industry. And it was a pretty staid industry that needed disrupting, and lots of potential, going like gangbusters, getting funding. And then they hit this critical point where they had more new employees, meaning people who had been there less than a year, than they had, I'll call them the existing or the foundational employees. And they're like, whoa, we need to put some structures in place. And so they did. But the structures they started putting in place were kind of your expected, like be in the office Monday through Friday, like an 8 to 5. And there's nothing wrong with that expected. But all of a sudden you can start to hear a company is going to be a disruptor. They hired people with this sense of we're going to be a disruptor, but then the experience they started delivering and trying to put some needed structure in place ran contrary to that. And then all of a sudden you have a lot of their existing and foundational employees leaving. And it's not because one is right and the other is wrong, it's that they just simply didn't fit together. And we'll talk about more of that, but I just want to share that story. That's the impact when we have misalignment in our business strategy, our talent strategy, and the work experience that we deliver. So with no further ado, let's get started. Go into presentation mode here. All right. And let's see.
Oh, there we go.
All good, right? Okay, so there I am. The other thing you should know, when I joined United Health Group, it was actually 80,000 employees just in the US. So by the time I left, it was about 2 years ago, it was 300, I guess it was now 3 years ago. Oh, time flies. 320,000 employees and around the world. And so I've done adaptation of our employer brand in multiple continents, countries, and cultures. Those 20 M&As that we referenced were also there. So I've worked in this, you know, maybe not exactly the feeling of high growth that you're dealing with, but I've dealt with that, like, who are you today? And it's almost like it's a different work experience tomorrow. So I want to get to know who I'm talking to just a tad bit more. So this is one of those times I'm telling you, get ready with the chat, like, and I'm not going to make this difficult for you. How many of you need to hire employees and you need to keep your existing employees? Like, that's critical to your business strategy and your revenue and growth plans. If that's the case, type E for employees. So we need to both hire and we need to retain. Otherwise, we got no chance of hitting revenue and growth plans. Okay, got quite a few E's coming in. Good. Hey, first of all, thanks for your participation. Yay. Okay. Then how many of you think that the perception of you as a place to work is accurate? I don't mean whether it's good or bad, because, you know, just like we're not perfect as human beings, businesses and cultures aren't perfect either, but it's accurate. So type in A if you think it's accurate based upon maybe what you see on Glassdoor and Indeed or what you hear. Okay, we got it. We got a couple two A's. All right, so we got some room there. If you're unsure, you can type a U. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not saying it's not accurate. I just don't know. Okay, a couple U's. Then here's it. How many of you are getting at least 30% of your new hires from employee referral? Type an R. At least 30%. Oh, a couple. Okay. And if you're not, or if you don't know, that's a good little little tip of something to look at and follow up to this. Whoa, what just happened? Click the wrong button. There we go. All right. And now I have subtitles. I'm having a banner day today. Here we go. All right. So let's talk about key messages. So I'm going to assume that you all know, like, what it is you say to your shareholders and your investors, and you have those messages locked down in your customers and your clients. So in this case, you're going to type either an exclamation mark or a question mark. Okay. How many of you are confident that your leaders in your company know the key messages for employees and candidates? So either exclamation mark, you're confident, like, I know my leaders know this. And question mark is, I don't know. I don't even know if we have key messages for employees or candidates. Couple exclamations, couple question marks, some mixed bag. Okay. And then this isn't a question, just something to think about. How confident are you those messages align to drive your business strategy? So you don't have to type on that one. It's noodling, food for thought. So let's also talk about differentiation. And on this, you're going to do a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being low differentiation and 5 being high differentiation. How different, and so you know your product is, you know your business is, otherwise you wouldn't be as successful as you are. But how differentiated is your work experience for the key talent that's critical for your business? 1 to 5, 1 being low differentiation, 5 being high. And if you don't know, you can type a question mark. 4s, 2s, 4s, 3s. A lot of middle of the road. Okay, good. It's good food for thought. Okay, so let's talk about employer branding. What I'm going to try to do today is make it straightforward and simple. And in a lot of ways it is, but I don't want to underplay the fact that that does not mean it's easy. Just like differentiation is a business driver for your product or your service, it also is for your employer brand. And we do have a worksheet, and it's in Canva, and that's okay if you don't have Canva, you can free account, but Michelle's going to post the link in the chat. So why we did that is it's a worksheet, and you can actually type in your answers. You can download it as a PDF, etc. But that's going to be a worksheet, and that is one of your tangible takeaways today to start crafting your differentiated employer brand and work experience. So if you're a huge company, you might do all sorts of research, and you should, and spend money on that. And the reason you need to is because you've got a lot of different talent pools. Maybe you have multiple businesses. And you got a lot of stakeholders that you got to convince, because oftentimes we're trying to break through their own paradigms. But here's the thing, and I think putting intentional time and thought is important, but that's not necessarily what you have to do if you're a small or high growth business. Okay, we got scrappy ways of handling things, and we're going to be scrappy today. And it can be easy to think that if you're small, it's harder for you. But I'm going to tell you something. I actually think if you're a small or high growth business, you have an advantage. And here's why I say that. When you're a large company, there are more talent pools that are sort of critical to driving your business, and they can be very, very different talent pools. I mean, United Health Group, we hired pilots and software engineers and nurses and customer service and like everything, right? So that can make it really hard. And when you have a multi-brand company, then you also are oftentimes tied to the corporate brand. And during the start of the pandemic, we looked at the Fortune 500 by industry, and by design, corporate brands tend to be pretty benign. And think about it, because in multi-brand companies, the corporate brand is really used for talking to shareholders, and then the employer brand gets tied to that. And there were exceptions. There were exceptions where you'd have, your intentionally benign corporate brand, and then your employer brand would be, more distinctive and differentiated. But generally, they're kind of tied together. So big companies kind of have their hands tied in a lot of ways. But as a small company or high growth company, you get to put a stake in the ground. You get to own who you are, and you get to be scrappy in the development. And so as we go through today, I'm going to give you some of our more scrappy ideas. So I think you have an advantage. But let's start with what is an employer brand. It is both the perception and the reality of your company as a place to work. And it runs the full talent life cycle, from the first time they're aware of you as a place to work, to hiring, onboarding, to as they take on new challenges and grow, to when they exit and they're an alumni. Right now, a lot of companies are trying to recruit those alumni back as they're looking for talent. And a LinkedIn study found that companies with strong employer brands had half the cost per hire of companies with poor or no employer brands, and then they had a quarter less turnover. Now, one thing about that, no one does not have an employer brand. You have one, it's just whether you have put any intention, design, or definition around it. That's really the key difference. So everyone has an employer brand. Even if you've not done any work, there is one that exists. There's the perception and the reality of you as a place to work. But let's talk about what an employer brand is not. It's not just a tagline or a campaign. It's not intended to be generic and benign. It's actually something that can powerfully help you filter talent in, but also filter talent out. If it's done really well, that's what it can do. And employer brands should not be impersonal, because where we work, we spend a lot of our lives there. It's how we provide for our livelihood and care for our loved ones. It is a very, very personal experience where we choose to work. So it's important that it not be impersonal. And it does exist. It's just whether we put some shape around it. And we'll talk about EVP. It's not the same thing as an employee value proposition. You actually have to develop your employee value proposition, and that'll help you with the brand. Now, one of the common questions I get is, how does the employer brand fit with the company brand or the product brand? So let's talk about that. And I'm just going to check the chat real quick, because I promised you all I would. So I'm checking the chat. Nothing yet. Okay.
Hey, Heather, quick, I'm going to use my my position as panelist here to ask a question. When you go back a couple slides to the what employer branding is, all those different things, do you find the companies you work with struggle the most in one of those areas?
Yes. I would say that, well, right now, I think most companies would tell you they struggle with attraction. But I think that's a lot to do with maybe not doing the definition around this work, and that one of the reasons why there's a lot of loss is of people is the lack of development and lack of mobility. And that doesn't mean increasing job titles, but it does mean the ability to take on new challenges and take on new roles to support their career goals. And the development is both the development of the employee themselves, but as you know, Michelle, I'm super passionate about manager development. And most companies do not train and develop their managers. They promote people because they have technical skills, but they never develop the people skills. And managers are the #1 reason someone leaves. So I would say that I think where most companies fall flat is then thinking about how their employer brand transfers to the lived experience inside the business in terms of development and mobility.
Makes sense.
Great question. Okay, so let's talk about how it fits with your corporate brand and maybe your product and service brand. Now, if you're a small business, your product and service brand and your corporate brand, they're kind of one and the same. It's usually when you get into multi-brand. So you may be going like, we really don't have both. That's okay. Don't panic. There's strong overlap between those two. But when you think about it, like for larger businesses, and even if you're a small high growth business, the way you're talking to your investors is distinct from how you might be talking to your customers or your prospects. It's very related, but it is, distinct in terms of messaging and audience. And the same is true with your current employees and potential employees. Now, these have an impact on one another. I mean, there are times where companies have a really poor reputation as a place to work that hits the news, and all of a sudden your market brand or your corporate brand takes a hit. I mean, Walmart, Amazon, and like Kate Hudson and Fabletics has dealt with that this year when dozens of workers alleged abuse in the factories that produce the apparel. So there is a relationship between these, and it also works the other way. You can have companies that their corporate or their market perception really makes it tough to attract and retain employees. Every tobacco company and every oil company struggles with this. Wells Fargo is struggling with this. WeWork definitely lost a lot of people, and they are working to turn around their perception as a place to work because of what's happened. So there's an interrelatedness that that we need to acknowledge and be thoughtful of. So the question, I know, Michelle, at the start, who owns employer branding? Everyone wants to know who owns it. And I'm going to get to the answer to that in what the ideal world is, and then the scrappy world, okay? But I'm going to get a little geeky for a second, okay? And so bear with me. We have this model, it's called the promise to profit chain, and this is supported by over 100 different studies, and it's how it's an important value chain. So obviously we're interested in growth and profitability as businesses, right? Well, what tends to drive growth and profitability? Well, it's customer experience, customer satisfaction, how we retain customers. Well, what are some of the drivers of those three things? Well, it has a lot to do with quality, innovation, the service, the retention of our people, and productivity. Like, are we offering the right product, right price, right time, and we can produce it at the right cost? Well, we know that those 5 things are strongly impacted by employee engagement, But employee engagement is not something you can do. It's an outcome, and it's an outcome of the employee experience. And more specifically, the employee experience in 8 areas that have been highlighted as being important to employees. And it's not like pool tables and nap pods, but it's the expectations an employee has of their experience against what? Well, against the promises that were made to them, against your mission, your values, your employee value proposition. So we make promises about who we are, what we say we stand for, how we're going to recognize and reward. And employees go, okay, sign me up for that. And then they join, and then they look. Are those promises alive and real? And there's 8 areas they look that are most important to them based upon research. Now, you know, depending upon whether you're looking at Deloitte or Aon Hewitt, they might have 7, they might have 9, but they're all in this bucket. So it's how we deliver on those promises in those 8 aspects of the employee experience, and do we enable them to deliver it and pay it forward then to our customers. So here's what happens in most organizations. So thank you for my little geeky model, but here's what happens in most organizations. Is in the white, that tends to be sales and marketing. Sales and marketing focuses on, we're going to define our promises and focus on customer satisfaction and retention and acquisition and help drive growth. And then operations in the gray goes, okay, well, we're going to make sure we can figure out production and supply chains and how we can and service and cost, and that drives profitability. And then HR tends to focus on the blue zones, okay, employee experience, engagement, and then the retention of people. If we don't have leadership that's all aligned, if we have silos between these organizations, you have a break in the value chain. And I will tell you, 90% of the time, I can trace back a company's performance to a break in this chain. And most importantly, where that break most often occurs is between the promises and the employee experience. So when we ask who owns the employer brand, the fact of the matter is it should be, in an ideal world, co-owned by these 3 groups. Actually, the whole executive leadership team should own it. And that's not always possible, right? Because there's a lot of things to own. So the next best thing is the role that I had, where I reported into the chief marketing officer and the chief talent officer to create a strong linkage, at least between two of these areas. Now, I know some of you are rolling your eyes going, Heather, we don't have a headcount we could just devote to that. And I hear you. So here is my scrappy way to solve for this. I once worked for a company that liked to leave an open chair in every meeting, and that chair represented the customer. Love that idea. So we're going to steal it and we're going to build upon it. Here is your scrappy way to do this. And that is, when you're having a meeting, and especially important decisions, we know we're going to talk about operations. We know we're going to talk about the financial impact, but ask people to wear 2 hats and rotate the hats. That's really important. So let's say I'm coming in and I've got my marketing hat on. I'm in charge of that. But then you say, Heather, you're also going to be the voice of our promises today, our brand promises, our values, who we say we are. And then someone else comes in and maybe they're HR, and you say, HR, you're also going to wear the hat of the customer. And then you have your operations person, you're also going to wear the hat of the employee. So as you have the conversation, and before you land on a final decision, you look at it through, what your job titles are, but then you say, let's do our check. Let's look at it through the lens of our promises and our values. Let's look at it through the lens of our employee and who we say we are and what they said, what we said they could count on us for. Let's look at it through the lens of our customer. That's your easy peasy way. And here's the thing, you get a twofer. You get a twofer because then you're using your values, which is what they're there for, to actually help guide your decisions. You're also using the lens of your customer and your employees. So it also helps to start embed your values and your culture when you use it for decision making. And when you've looked through the lens of your customer and your employee, it also makes your communications that much easier because you've already walked in those shoes. So and last but not least, actually, I'm going to say it's now a threefer. You start to build the muscle among your leadership team to own that employee experience and that employer brand and aligning it with that promises. Because you can't afford to have just one person who's going to own it. And yes, you can have a point person, but that has everyone have their eye on what's critical in that value chain. I'm just going to pause before we move on and see if there's any questions in the chat related to that. So this is my scrappy way to do it. Do you like that, Michelle? I see a smile.
I like it. I actually really like that. One question, I'm seeing a lot of job openings for talent branding.
Yes.
Does that sit in marketing? Does that sit in HR?
Well, Michelle, it's almost like you have my slides. So let's talk about it in the very next slide because I have opinions. I'm not short of opinions on this. So the first question I usually get, it's that, Michelle, where should they sit? But also how do we budget for this? Now, here's my first, it's a real response. A lot of leaders will talk about how their most valuable asset is their talent. And so I say to you, when you're thinking about how much you should spend on all of this, how important is talent to your business strategy? And there's an answer that will be given, but I'll also invite you to look at the finances of most organizations do not necessarily align with that. Okay. So I know we need a place to start. So I've got a place to start. And as we go through this, Michelle, I'm also going to start to answer your question about where I think things should sit. And also I go further, and I'm probably going to get myself in trouble, who I think you should work with. So let's talk employer brand. I think, if you're allocating money for brand work for your company, add another 30% for your employer brand. Okay. Now, here's why I say that. I think there can also be some ways to get some cost savings in there. So you develop your overall brand and you're developing your assets. And then you can, like if you're developing social media templates, et cetera, then you can develop the templates for your talent marketing as well. In fact, I know we've got a couple of people on the line that have worked with Megan at Sublime, and I work with her, and I know you do like a full work day or 2 half work days to develop your brand. And, Meg and I would recommend that you come back then, maybe it's like a couple weeks later, and we do another half day on your employer brand so that you get this all sort of singing together and buttoned up. So it's not that you have to have a whole nother full work day, but you do need to put some intentional time and thought about it. Now, here's where I get kind of opinionated. I think the best, I've worked, like I said, I worked in employer brand, I've worked with consumer marketing agencies and the talent marketing agencies. The best creative, I'm going to get in trouble, come out of the consumer marketing firms, but they don't necessarily have the expertise in the talent space. You do need someone who has employer branding expert to help educate them and have, your HR ideally at the table too, of how to tailor it for this particular audience. Okay, so that's my recommendation there. Then let's talk about talent marketing to get to your question. And that is, attracting talent doesn't happen by osmosis. So again, I would recommend adding 25% to your marketing spend and your marketing resources and supporting your talent needs. And here's why. There's a lot of marketing technology that's involved, and HR people just don't have that knowledge and that expertise. There's a lot of data that flows through there related to marketing data. And again, marketing has that expertise. And there's one thing, I tried this 3 different times. I tried 3 different times to go, is it better to take a marketing person and have them apply their knowledge and skills to the talent space? Or do I take someone who has the robust knowledge of the talent space and try to teach them the marketing skills? And I will tell you 3 different times I tried this, and it was always easier to hire a marketer and have them apply it to the talent space, because as marketers, we're used to thinking about who our target audience is. And in this case, your target audience is your prospective talent. It's almost asking someone from the talent space, because that is a ton of knowledge that they have in HR and talent, and take on a whole nother discipline. It just didn't work as well. So that's one of my opinions. So I want these resources to sit in marketing, but also report into HR. And because it's more of a marketing job than it is anything else. And then here's one other thing. It can't be like the stepchild or the person who gets shoved off to the side, because you have social channels like LinkedIn. And I know LinkedIn's going to try to pitch you and tell you that, they're for the sales and the business, and they are, but over 60% of the activity on LinkedIn is still entirely associated with being a place to work. So it's still primarily that, and it has to be your presence, and your brand on LinkedIn needs to be managed accordingly. So that's why I also say you need some resources that are going to focus on it. But here's the one thing. In this case, you should work with talent marketing agencies for 2 reasons. One, there are channels that are distinct to talent that the consumer marketing agencies aren't going to know, and they're not going to have relationships with. And secondly, it's less expensive to work with the talent marketing agencies in placing media. So that's my recommendation there. Have a role sit in marketing, but you do need to have a relationship with the talent marketing agency. And then last but not least, employee experience. And here's really the benchmark. You should be spending as much to retain talent as you are to attract and onboard. And I know that a lot of companies, they are not doing that today. And that actually perpetuates this great resignation. Because Michelle, to the question you asked earlier, which was so perfect, number one reason people leave is their manager. And the number two reason they leave is their own lack of growth and development in their career. And when we don't focus on the employee experience to make sure we're delivering on those promises and giving people, you know, the opportunity and the support for them to grow and develop, that's what's going to have them walk out the door. But it's really important from an employee experience perspective that it is connected to the customer experience. And I do see in a number of companies where those things will be separate and there's not a connection point. But again, part of this is all about driving our overall business strategy. And it is our employees who deliver on our customer experience. So those two things need to be closely tied. In fact, one other thing about that, Forbes did a study in 2020 and two findings. First, revenue growth is linked to high employee experience regardless of the customer experience. Again, linked to high employee experience regardless of customer experience prioritization. And companies that have both high employee experience and high customer experience almost double the revenue growth than those that don't. Because high EX, those employees, when you do employee experience, it does impact positively customer experience and drive revenue growth. That is, the reverse is not true. If you work solely on customer experience, it does not necessarily drive any difference in employee experience, and you won't realize the full growth potential that you could out of customer experience work, because again, it's the employees who deliver on it. So I want to check in, Michelle, to answer your question about who should, where it should sit and how to budget for it.
You did. And I'm very excited next to talk about some of the examples too that you pulled, because I think it is quite fascinating when you look across them, how indistinct they are.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to get into developing your employer brand. This is where the worksheet comes in. Okay. And not that you're necessarily going to fill out the worksheet on the call today. I mean, if you can, go for it. But it kind of starts walking you through the steps of what to think about. And also on the back of the worksheet, or the second page of the worksheet, is nothing to fill in. It's points to think about. So what I included on there were those 8 aspects of the employee experience to think about, and also how we think of differentiation in our product and services and how that might translate to the employee experience. Because I know a lot of us come at it from, from that perspective. So I wanted to kind of provide a guide where we can map it over. So first on the top of the page is mission. And I'm not going to dive into this because I think most of you know what a mission is. It's why we exist. And it's not about money. It's not about a business goal. It's really that why people should care and what impact we will make, why it matters that we exist as an organization. And so then we have the values, and the values are how we need to act to make our mission a reality. And they should influence decision-making. And I say should, because it is one of the most powerful tools that we have inside of an organization that oftentimes doesn't get used. And that's why I like that seats at the table that I recommended earlier, because it has those values top of mind for influencing the decisions we make, how we're going to implement those decisions, and of course, how we are going to go about it and how we're going to work. But here's one of the gaps that happens after the values, because we define the values at a top level and maybe we have 2 or 3 sentences, right, for the values. And what we don't do is this next work. So when I talked about, you have your work day for your brand, and then we add on like another half work day, this is part of the work that needs to be added on, is we actually have to define the behaviors that represent those values. What do those values look like? What do they sound like? What do they feel like? And here's what happens when we don't define it. So let's say someone has a value of innovation. And by the way, that is the most common value in the Fortune 500. Everyone's got innovation. And if they don't have innovation, they have integrity. And you have one leader who thinks, okay, I'm going to help drive this value of innovation. And they're like, okay, I'm going to bring in all these different perspectives. And that's what innovation looks like to that leader. And another leader says, no, you know what? I think innovation comes out of competition. And they create a little mini Lord of the Flies exercise within their group. Both leaders are driving innovation, but if we haven't defined what it looks like, it feels like, it sounds like, you can see those are two really different experiences. And then the people who are under the Lord of the Flies leader are thinking it's a toxic leader. The organization doesn't care. They're allowing that person to stay, and then they're more apt to leave. So it's really important to go, what behaviors really reflect these values, really demonstrate them? Like, what's the gold standard we all want to hold ourselves to, ideally? What will we not tolerate? And how will we hold ourselves and then each other to account for those behaviors? Your values are meaningless unless you're using them to make decisions and help prioritize what's going on in the organization. And your values are meaningless if there is no accountability. And there cannot be accountability if there is not definition. And then what you'll see is a lot of companies who haven't done this definition work, they are also struggling to talk about their culture. Why is that? Well, your culture that's how we do things. That's how things get done. That's how we recognize and reward. It's how we're connected and communicated. The culture is what comes out of all those behaviors. So you can hear how, like, well, if we haven't defined innovation and it can look this way here and this way there, all of a sudden you end up with this muddiness and people can't really talk about it. And I love the quote, Michelle, that you included in the email for the event of, our culture is unique, says everybody. The other thing I'm seeing, lots of leaders posting on LinkedIn, we have a great culture, because great is super descriptive and helps us understand, right? Now, it is true that every culture is unique, but how people talk about it is not. And in fact, it's quite bland. And it's because they actually haven't put definition to it. I'll give you a great example. I was working with a client and they wanted to do a culture guide. And as much as I tried to get them to define these behaviors, they wanted to step over that and just go to the culture guide. Okay, great. So I was helping them because I've worked with them for a while. And I sent back some of what I would consider their definition of their culture. And one of the things I said is, you know, they care a lot, and they do. And they want everyone to be heard. So that is a very positive thing. But as a result, things take longer to move inside their organization, and they have a tendency to make things harder than they need to be. And it's something they're working on. And oh my gosh, they were like, oh, you know, oh, how can we say, oh my gosh? And first of all, they didn't believe it about themselves. I said, okay. And they said, well, will you point out examples? So I did. And after 8 examples over 6 weeks, they said, okay, Heather, we got it. This really is who we are. But you know, it's not a problem that that's who they are. It's self-awareness. We want our leaders and our people to have emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness. We need to have some self-awareness about our culture. And if we haven't put the thought and we haven't put the definition about it, and we can't own who we are, that's why you end up with all these really bland and benign and, like, you know, definitions of we have a great culture or it's unique, because we haven't done that self-awareness work. So you got to define the behaviors, and then that starts to help you do the self-awareness of going, yeah, this is a plus. We care a lot, but sometimes then we make things harder than they need to be. And that's okay. But that gives you something really distinctive to talk about when you're talking about why choose us. So these are some of the examples. And I kid you, first of all, I want to assure you that no one on the call, none of the companies represented on the call are in these examples. So you can breathe deep. If you look at these are so benign. These could be any company, literally any company. And in these examples, we looked out and it played out across, you know, their job postings and everything. Now, I am going to show you mostly candidate touch points because obviously I'm not inside of these organizations, but you know, it does play out. Then I've got another example here. This is a startup, and they don't even try, like when you click on their careers button, they don't even try on their site to explain anything about their culture or values, nothing. So not so good there. But the job posting is a little better because at least they talk about the work environment and what would make someone a good fit. But it's missing a key ingredient. And I'll get to that in just a second. Then here were 2 event specialist postings, and they are from very different companies, very different in various stages of company life cycles and growth. Again, they're not on this call, but these event specialists job postings could be for any role. So why do I feel, and in fact, on the left one, you'll notice that this one, the applications were due January 1st, and I just pulled that on Monday, and it's February. And then they want a cover letter, but we'll talk about that later. So very benign. And then here's what I pulled for software engineers, because it's not like anyone needs any software engineers, right? Also very different companies, not on this call. One of these isn't awful because at least, there's something in here about why you may or may not be a fit, but this is a really high demand, high touch talent pool. They aren't looking for jobs. People are calling them and almost stalking them. And if this is what's said when the job gets sent to them, it's not really compelling as to why this highly competitive talent pool should work for you. So what all of these are missing is these are all missing the what's in it for me, for the employee, for the potential employee. And let me give you an analogy. That's like a dating website or going on a first date, and all someone does is talks about themselves. And our work relationships is one of the most important relationships we'll have. And all of these examples are going on a first date with someone, and it's all about me. That is not a very good start to a relationship. So let's talk about the employee value proposition, the what's in it for me for employees. When an employee delivers on our mission in a way that reflects our values, the employee value proposition is what they can expect in return. It is the what's in it for me. And it is missing in most, like the careers websites, the job postings, but guess what? It's also missing in a lot of communications. And I know, Michelle, like you and I talked like a year ago about sometimes it's just adding a sentence when a new series of funding is won or an acquisition happens, tailoring that communication, even if it's just one sentence to go, why should the employee care? What's in it for them that we just got Series B funding? What's in it for them? Does it mean more opportunity? Does it mean, more, I don't know, but we have to tell them what it means for them. And again, it's about being in a relationship and talking about what's in it for all of this. Imagine pitching to a prospective customer and not telling them what's in it for them. And yet companies do that every single day. And with the market being as competitive as it is, we got to be really good about telling people why they should choose us. So let me show you how this could play out. Welcome Tech is not connected to me or anyone on this call. I just became aware of them and I got intrigued. They're a Series B they just got Series B funding. So let's start with investors. I pulled this from their website. You definitely get a clear idea about what it is, what they do, what it solves for, and the opportunity for the investors. Then I also pulled from their website what their customers get out of it and how that ties. You can see that strong tie to the investors. Then I made this last part up. Let's be very clear. I have not talked to anyone at Welcome Tech. I made this up. But I went, okay, if I know those two pieces, what might I say is what's in it for the employees? And I thought, well, if we're helping people build their American dream, wouldn't it be awesome if our employees could build that dream for themselves so they actually live and experience it and then they pay it forward to everyone they serve? Love that. Okay, so I made this up and I might send this to them afterwards and say, hey, you should hire me, but separate stuff. So let me tell you, and this is going to be an eye chart, but I'm not going to read everything. Then I thought about that employee value proposition and how might that play out across the employee experience. And that's where on the back of the worksheet, you see those points of differentiation, those 8 aspects of the employee experience. So I made this up. First of all, in the segments that they're playing in, finance, healthcare, and education, all those segments struggle with representation. So if they want to hire and attract people who really understand their customer base, it's going to be slim pickings out there. But they should buy the talent when they need it. But what they should really do is help that talent build their American dream. So build talent as a core strategy. So hire underrepresented talent at their existing levels and have a huge commitment to development, to helping them grow in their career and their abilities so that they can build them up to the skill levels they need so they can build an employee population that really understands the needs of those that they're serving. So I would a total build strategy here. And then have them use the capabilities of the access to the company platform for healthcare and health benefits that meet the unique needs of underrepresented talent. And same with financial, and pay them in the top quartile so they don't have to have multiple jobs, which is a common thing. Because then they're going to give you your best, their best, and they're going to have a strong sense of loyalty. I already talked about the investment in internal development. If we're attracting underrepresented talent and immigrant talent, then let's provide legal support for immigration and family law. Community and family, super important. So let's tailor our how we support communities accordingly so they get the chance to positively impact their community. And work experience, let's not forget about the work experience. We're going to have leaders trained to support their growth and development. And by the way, we're going to redefine what leadership looks like, because in too many companies, there's one model for what leadership looks like. And if we want to build this breadth of talent, then we've got to make sure that we're not trying to fit people into one model, because that's what they can struggle with at every other financial, healthcare, and education institution. And also we're going to do work from home funding and paid Wi-Fi. These are just things that I threw out there, but this is how it would play out, so that we created a whole employee experience that supports employees in building their dream. And who's done this well is Bumble. Bumble's target customer is women. I mean, they believe in healthy relationships, healthy and equitable. And they have a strategic effort to have a very women-centric workforce, and so that their workforce understands the needs of their customer. And their employment experience is a match. I mean, look at this. Healthcare is covered. They cover the cost to ship breast milk. I've not heard of anyone doing that. Compassionate leave, discounts for IVF and egg freezing. I mean, you can tell they really know their target employee base. What's not on this page, which I found really intriguing, but it is something they announced this in the past few months, 20 days paid leave for domestic violence abuse survivors. Now, I was like, I have not heard of that. Now domestic abuse disproportionately impacts women. So that part I got, but I'm like, the 20 days? And I educated myself to learn that obviously I knew that when someone leaves a situation like that, it's the most dangerous time. But what I didn't know is they have to disappear essentially for a month during that time period. And so that creates job loss oftentimes. And Bumble said, no, not where we are. We're going to give them the paid leave so that they can take care of themselves. So talk about knowing your employees. It's amazing. I wouldn't need that benefit, but I love that they offer it. And so they increase their perception with me. Now I have here too, they have their, the other thing I found distinctive is they talk about diversity and inclusion, and there's this letter from Whitney about that. The one thing they did that was distinct that I've not seen others do is this diversity statement right at the very start of every job posting. And it's not the staple statement. So they're standing behind it. Now, to be honest, I looked at their job posting. They have a little more opportunity for the what's in it for me. So no one's perfect, but this is really good. I looked at, I don't even know how to pronounce this, and I'm going to apologize. Arcturus. I'm sorry, but it made my heart sing. Look at this statement up here. These are also our promises to you. So they're not just talking about there are values, but they are the promises we're making to you. So they actually talk about that. And then every value is like with us. I don't know if there's is the reality or not. I looked up, they didn't have any Indeed or Glassdoor rankings yet, but the way they're talking about it is distinct. Then we have Lessonly here. Lessonly is super descriptive of their culture. And one of the things I like is they show versus just tell. I mean, they go no meeting Wednesdays. That is very specific. Sharing before we're ready and having difficult conversations. That is a way to specifically show transparency and integrity in action versus using words to tell. Making their hometown brighter, again, specific and showing versus telling. They were recently acquired, so they only have 5 reviews, but they do have a 4-star rating on Indeed. So it tells me that there's something that's translating internally to the employee experience as well. And then in their job postings, they talk about being a llama. And so they do have this in here, what we have for you. So in their job postings, they have the what's in it for you, love. And then Hakoda, and I believe we might have you on the call. And I love this statement, and it's probably a little bit hard to read, but know that you are taken care of. When you join us, relax and know that you are taken care of. Like starting off right away about what's in it for you. And they have some great proof points, and they have one here that I really, really love where they show versus tell, saying that you get eight hours to donate to their to a cause that you care about. So that's an example of translating the what's in it for you and showing versus telling. So what to do now? Well, you've got the worksheet. You can do a quick pulse check on your mission and values. The key things I would say coming out of this is those behaviors to define those values and really leveraging them for making decisions. And this might just be a working session. Like maybe you all like huddle for a half day yourselves and you can work through that worksheet. You know, I wouldn't say no if you want to bring me in, of course, but I'm trying to give you scrappy ways to start putting some intention and some thought and some definition around your employer brand and employee experience so that you can differentiate yourself in the marketplace. Culture, how do you work? Is the emotional intelligence work been done so that we can describe our culture in a very authentic, real, and tangible way? And then what is in it for the employee? When they deliver on our mission in a way that reflects our values, what do they get out of it other than a paycheck? What can we promise to them? And how does that align and shore up with what we promise to our customers and investors? And then how can you think differently about your employee experience so that it actually delivers on that value prop? And then you show versus tell what makes you distinct and differentiated in the marketplace when you're trying to hire for those software engineers or those event specialists. And then the last thing that I'll say is, how are you going to measure and monitor? And particularly as you scale, if you're one of those high growth businesses, that's important too. So I think at this point, Michelle, and then you're welcome to follow up with me. I've got my email up on the screen. Kim, so your question will definitely share these slides. Yes, we will share the slides. So I think with that, Michelle, we can, I'm going to stop sharing and then we can take any last questions. We got 6 minutes left.
Well, I will let some folks type in some questions, but I have one in the meantime, which relates to something you just said at the very end, which is kind of measure, monitor progress on it. How do you know if it's working? Like, and how long do you give it? Like when someone says, I want to make employer branding my #1 priority because talent is a big issue for us, how long does that take to start to see effect, given that it's the entire journey?
Yeah. It takes a while. I'm not gonna lie. I know you want me to give you like, hey, we can make that happen in 3 months. We can definitely identify some low-hanging fruit, but someone once used this analogy and I love it. It has to do with perennial plants. The first year they walk, the next year, the first year perennial plants, for those of you who are not gardeners, the first year they crawl, the next year they walk, the third year they run. And any brand work, even your overall brand, that can be very, very true as well. And so you got to prioritize. You got to take some of those low-hanging fruits. There's some of these things that you can take action on right away. There's some of those things, like if you're going to invest in manager development, because that's going to be really important for delivering on that experience, you got to give some time for those managers to actually grow and develop. What's nice is, though, taking this approach creates sustainable business results. And so you are playing for that 2 and that 3 year game plan, but that's also where you have to prioritize.
I love it. It doesn't look like we have any more questions coming through, so I think we'll definitely share these slides. I will also send out a link to the worksheet again, in case folks close that out in the chat window. And Heather, just wanted to say thank you for this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.